Hello everyone, Pulse here to bring you yet another episode of Forging Fantasy, EverQuest Next. Now in this episode we're going to pick apart the recent interview conducted between MMORPG.com and SOE's very own Terry Michaels and Dave Georgeson, which was done on the MMORPG.com Game On podcast. Now much like previous interviews we've just dissected on the show here, I'm going to pick out the new and interesting bits, but don't you worry, if you're interested in listening to or reading the full interview for every little nugget of information you can get out of it, I'll make sure to have a link down below in the description for both the podcast and the write-up version so you guys can take a look. Now, one thing I do need to mention before we get into the details of this thing, because this was done in podcast format with two people from SOE answering, there are some weird phrasings and stuff going on, some weird stumblings on the words, and I'll try to piece it together, but it looks like one person probably gave the beginning of an answer, and then, as usual in podcast formats, somebody else kind of takes the reins. So there's some weird stuff, so I'll probably sound like a bumbling fool at a couple of parts, but don't worry, that's the phrasing in the actual quotes, and not me being an idiot. Well, this time anyway. I'll try to keep my idiocy to a minimum. But let's get into the actual questions and answers of this interview, the ones that are interesting anyway. Now, they start off by talking about the Forbes interview that was conducted a little bit ago. We dissected that on the show not so long ago now, which gave us a lot of good info about combat and landmark and all that stuff. And that led to MMORPG asking this question of the guys. With that, can you comment at all on if it is going to be the exact same system that players will experience in EverQuest Next, or will they be different, and if so, any details on how? Well, we can talk a little bit about that. We want to make sure that the moment-to-moment fun of combat that is going to be in EverQuest Next is part of the combat in Landmark, but it won't be the full multi-classing system that we talked about for Next when you were talking about combat and Landmark. It will be, I don't want to say simpler, there will be less options perhaps. We want to focus on different ways that you can play the game and try to hone in on those rather than having players hone in on them themselves. We aren't going to do the multi-classing thing, but there will still be lots of options in combat. There will still be range, there will still be spellcasters, melee, and all of those kinds of things, but it won't be about going out and collecting those 40 classes like we talked about for EverQuest Next. Now, this is we kind of already knew this, right? We figured that they weren't going to do the huge multi-classing system in Landmark, because otherwise what would EverQuest Next have? It wouldn't have very much to go for, right? There's already so much blur, people are getting confused. But then they kind of gave some clarification with this next question. So MMORPG asks, with the classes, is there... I know we have the adventure class, and in that article you had commented that if it is related to combat, we would be able to transfer that class over to EverQuest Next. Is that going to be the de facto class, or will there be some variety? We also commented on being able to play ranged, for example, versus a melee character. And then the guys from SOE came back and answered, well, when we introduce combat, we are going to have to introduce a couple of other classes into Landmark to allow for the different playstyles. We have yet to determine if they will transfer directly over like the adventure class or not. We are also adding, we are probably going to change a couple of little systems to make Landmark be its own critter. One of the things we are talking about is that maybe they can swap out weapons more than that particular class can swap out the kind of attack options that it is using. Different weapons, that is how they would switch between melee, range, and spells, whereas in EverQuest Next, a class only has a couple of weapons to go with that class, and you are collecting all of those different classes to adopt and find unique combat styles. In Landmark, there will be fewer options, so we are going to allow you to use them in just the one class rather than coming up with a whole bunch of different classes. So those things kind of combine. It's again what we would have expected, but I always say on these shows that the definitive and the concrete answers coming directly from the devs are always worth pointing out and always appreciated. That way we're not just kind of stuck doing speculation all the time. Now I like that they did mention that in Landmark it will be limited classes, but we will probably get extra ones. I'm thinking probably we'll have the adventurer, then we'll have like a very basic mage thing, we'll have a very basic melee guy, and then a very basic like archer class, something like that. So we'll have like 3 to 4 available if you count the adventurer. But the big thing that again is kind of what we should have expected considering the very Minecrafty nature of Landmark. So when we're in Landmark, we're going to get a menagerie of weapons and tools, right, that we can just use pretty much without limitation. It's all going to be about just the weapons are there to provide that combat, and we'll still have the movement and the dodging and all of that good stuff, but it won't be the same as EverQuest Next, the MMO version that's going to come later, where we collect 40 plus classes. And the big difference is that EverQuest Next is going to have the big RPG elements of character progression and specialization and all of that good stuff, where Landmark is not going to have that. It's going to be more about the functionality of combat and the fun of it, without completely dwarfing the EverQuest Next MMO by stealing all of its designs and implementation. So it will be two different experiences in the combat front as well. They will be similar. I'm pretty sure they will play pretty damn similar. But the thing is that if you're wanting the RPG, you're wanting the big progressive MMO, you're still going to want to play EverQuest Next, even if you've played Landmark. So I'm glad to see that they've tried their best, at least, to kind of give us a little bit more perspective as to their plans, because a lot of people are indeed confused as to why you would play one over the other, because they sound to be the same game at this point. Every time they mention it, Landmark is suddenly getting another mechanic from the MMO release, so we're not really sure what's going on with that, but I'm still fairly confident in the fact that we're going to get two separate experiences here, so I'm not too worried about it. Now let's get into this other quote that came from these guys. The question from MMORPG was this: slightly different section here. We're kind of bouncing back and forth. We have a long list, and I know you guys are short on time. So in terms of combat, going back to EverQuest Landmark, you talked a bit with Forbes, I believe, about solo and group encounters being a part of the game, and I am curious if there's a balance with that, if you are designing more toward players grouping together or these things, or if the solo player can go in there and get the best items without partnering up. I guess kind of related to that is, are their best items going to be a kind of group-only boss drops like we would see in traditional MMOs? And they answered with, so we haven't talked much about how we're going to have loot in the game and things like that, and when we do talk about this, it will make a little bit more sense. But the idea is that we want to encompass all kinds of different gameplay styles. So if you are a solo player and that is what you want to do, we want to make sure that there is an avenue in the game that you can play and feel fulfilled and succeed at. And then on the other side is, if you like going out and doing group content with your friends, we also want to make sure that it is supported too. So it is not a system where one is inherently better than the other. They are going to be different. The kinds of activities that you are going to participate in are going to be different, and the rewards are going to be appropriate to the kinds of things you are trying to do. Although we are going to be really blatant about rewarding group play, it is a social game, and we will be extremely open about the fact that we will reward group play. As a matter of fact, we just recorded something that we'll be releasing next week that exactly talks up to the fact that we are not making a single player game. It is not the kind of game we are making. We are making an MMO. If we are making a single player game, then we would cater entirely to the single player, to people that want to play by themselves. We are bucking the trend here. We are talking about death penalties that have some bite, getting people to group together, and actually making the game challenging. I know, I'm shocked, right? I have to say, I really like this. I really like this answer. I really, really do. SOE continues to impress, and continues to impress me at least. Every time they come out and give these answers, they're just very forward about their thought process, really. They're coming out and telling us that they realize their design decisions are probably going to be pretty damn niche, right? But they don't really care. They realize that it's going to be niche, especially with the shift in market for the MMOs and kind of what would be considered by some, at least, this kind of casual overtaking of the genre. They realize all this, and they're embracing it, and that's really exciting to see. And I like to see that they are indeed embracing it and then continuing with their creative vision with EverQuest Next and Landmark. I mean, they're probably sitting there going, you know what, guys? EverQuest fans would eat us alive. They would slaughter us if we dumbed down and made a game that wasn't for them, and we don't want to do that. And we don't want to do that ourselves anyway. We don't want to dumb down this game that we love. Why would we do that? So, you know what? Why the hell are we going to? There's no reason to get mass appeal here. We want to be in a good light with our fans. We want to make a game that we love and our fans will love, so let's make that game. Let's make a game that is accessible, especially with the free-to-play. It's going to be accessible, so don't worry about that. But I really like that they mentioned that they want to keep it challenging and make it rewarding because the players actually did the challenge instead of it making, oh, I got shinies. Now, I'm sure there's going to be some shiny, grindy stuff going on. It's just the typical MMO thing. But there's so much more going on with EverQuest Next and Landmark. I'm just really falling in love with this game. I mean, they're sitting here, they're defying convention, and they're not really worrying about appealing to the masses. Instead of they're just making a great game that fans and themselves are going to love. It's really, really awesome. I'm really, really excited to see what else we can get out from these guys. But I also have to say that I'm really impressed and just super excited to hear them talk about the solo player thing. This is such a problem in MMOs, and I don't know when exactly it became a problem where solo players are, one, they're playing a game called massively multiplayer online. By its definition, you should be playing with other people. Yet somehow solo players come into the game. And you know what? I guess that's okay. If you want to play by yourself and experience the game, that's cool. But somewhere down the line, solo players that are doing this somehow became entitled to getting loot that is irrelevant to their actual play and to their actual play style. I don't know when this happened, but I really like that they kind of pointed out that you're gonna get stuff that's relevant to you, but we're making a group game, so if you don't want to do group content, don't expect to get the big stuff at the end. You're not going to use it anyway. It's not going to help you progress anything. You're playing the solo game. It's going to help these guys going into group content much more than you. Why should you feel entitled? I really like that. Now, obviously, it wasn't quite worded that way in the actual quote, but it really just, when I read that, I was like, this is a developer who has looked at the MMO market for a while and been like, I just want to punch some of these people in the head. They were just jabbing them really hard, going, stop it, you entitled bastards. You're not getting the gear that you are not even going to use anyway. I really love it, though. I don't know, maybe I'm just rating a little bit much into that, but that got me excited. I got a big smile on my face for sure. I'm really growing to love this game with every little bit of information that comes our way. I'm loving it, if you guys can't tell. But you know what, guys, this is going to bring us to the wrap-up for the episode. I know, don't cry, I'll be back with more pretty soon. But I have to say thank you so much for watching and listening, and if you found this enjoyable or informative in the slightest, I very much appreciate a thumbs up and a subscribe. Also, make sure to leave a comment down below on anything discussed today, anything EverQuest Next or Landmark or anything MMO or gaming related at all, really. Also, make sure to check out the article or the podcast. As I said at the beginning, I'll have a link down in the description. Check it out, especially if you are into the lore of the EverQuest series or you're wanting to learn more. There's a section kind of in the middle where they talk about the lore of the different games and how they're kind of connected, and something about there's a multiverse going on between the different games, and Landmark is its own separate thing. It exists in the lore, but it doesn't. And then there's this weird connecting realm called the Ethermere or something like that. It's kind of weird, but if you're into the lore, I definitely say check it out for sure. But yeah, I think that's it for me today, guys. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.